I watched through my lawyer's office window as Derek loaded the last box into his truck, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth that I recognized all too well. It was the same smile he'd worn when he closed his first $1 million real estate deal, the same one that had flickered across his face when he told me he wanted a divorce. Victory looked good on him, or so he thought. "Mrs. Patterson, are you absolutely certain about this?" My attorney, Richard, adjusted his glasses with trembling fingers. In his 30 years of practice, he'd never seen a client do what I was about to do. I nodded, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene below. Derek was practically strutting now, believing he'd just pulled off the con of the century. Our 10-year marriage was ending exactly as he'd planned, with him taking everything while I walked away with what appeared to be nothing. "He's taking all of it," Richard continued, his voice strained with disbelief. "The investment portfolio, the rental properties, the business assets, even your grandmother's jewelry collection. The judge tried to stop this, Elena. You know that, right?" "I know," I said softly, watching Derek high-five his brother Trevor, who'd helped him load what Derek believed was his treasure trove. If only they knew what those boxes actually contained. But they wouldn't know, not yet. Not until it was far too late to do anything about it. The divorce proceedings had been a masterclass in manipulation. Derek had hired the most aggressive attorney in the state, a shark named Victoria Brendan, who specialized in decimating her opponents. They'd buried me in paperwork, filed motion after motion, and dragged the process out for 18 months until my legal fund was nearly depleted. Then came their final masterstroke, an offer so devastatingly one-sided that Richard had actually gasped when he read it. Derek would take everything, and I mean everything, in exchange for a one-time payment of $50,000 and the deed to my late mother's small cabin in Vermont. The cabin was worth maybe $70,000, and it needed extensive repairs. On paper, I'd be walking away from a marriage to a multimillionaire with barely enough money to rent an apartment for a year. "Every attorney in this building thinks I've lost my mind," Richard said, gathering the signed documents with hands that still shook. "The judge practically begged you to reconsider during the final hearing." I remembered that moment vividly. Judge Morrison had removed her glasses and looked directly at me, her weathered face etched with concern. "Mrs. Patterson, I strongly advise you to reject this settlement. This is financial suicide. Do you understand what you're agreeing to?" I'd stood up, smoothed down my simple black dress, one of the few pieces of clothing I'd be keeping, and said the words that sealed the deal. "Your Honor, I understand completely. I just want this to be over. He can have it all. I don't want to fight anymore." The look of pure triumph on Derek's face had been intoxicating. He thought he'd broken me. He thought the shy, trusting woman he'd married had simply given up. Victoria had actually clapped him on the shoulder in congratulation. What none of them understood was that I'd been planning this moment for 3 years. It started the night I'd come home early from a supposed work conference and found Derek in our bed with Melissa, his 26-year-old executive assistant. The cliché of it would have been laughable if it hadn't shattered my world into 1,000 pieces. But it wasn't just the affair that destroyed me. It was what I discovered in the days that followed. Derek had been siphoning money from our joint accounts for years. He'd been living a double life, maintaining a luxury apartment downtown where he entertained Melissa and who knows how many others. He'd taken out loans against properties we owned together without my knowledge. He'd forged my signature on documents. He'd lied about business trips, charity events, family emergencies. Our entire marriage had been built on a foundation of deception, so elaborate that I'd needed 3 spiral notebooks just to document all of it. Most women would have confronted him immediately. Most women would have filed for divorce right then and exposed everything. But I wasn't most women, and I'd learned something crucial about Derek over our decade together. He was predictable. Give him an opportunity to be greedy, and he'd take it every single time. Give him a chance to humiliate me, and he'd savor every second. His arrogance was his Achilles heel, and I intended to use it to destroy him. So I'd smiled through dinner that night and pretended I'd seen nothing. I'd kissed him goodbye the next morning and wished him luck at work. And then I'd begun to plan. The first step was gathering evidence. I hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named Catherine who came highly recommended and asked no unnecessary questions. Over the next 6 months, Catherine compiled a file 3 inches thick detailing Derek's affairs, his financial crimes, his cocaine habit that I'd somehow never noticed, and his plans to divorce me and marry Melissa once he'd successfully hidden all our assets where I couldn't touch them. The second step was more delicate. I needed to move our actual assets, the real money, the valuable items, everything that mattered, without Derek noticing. This required help from people who owed me favors, and over the years, I'd collected quite a few. My best friend Natasha was a corporate accountant who knew how to make money disappear and reappear in ways that left no trail. My cousin James was an estate lawyer who specialized in trusts and asset protection. My former college roommate Diane ran an art authentication business and knew every appraiser, dealer, and collector from New York to Los Angeles. Together, we created a financial phantom, a version of our marital assets that looked real on paper, but was actually worth less than the paper it was printed on. Over 2.5 years, working with meticulous care, we made substitutions. The original Chagall painting that hung in our living room, worth $2.3 million, was replaced with a masterful forgery that cost me $12,000. Derek never noticed because he'd never actually looked at the painting. It was just expensive wallpaper to him. The investment portfolio that showed $4.7 million in blue-chip stocks and bonds? Real enough that it showed up on every financial statement. But the actual certificates had been carefully transferred to an irrevocable trust in my name, replaced with worthless shell company stocks that looked identical on paper. Derek's financial advisor was in on it. Turned out Derek had tried to sleep with his wife, and the advisor had been waiting for the right moment to return the favor. My grandmother's jewelry collection, worth close to $800,000, was swapped piece by piece with cubic zirconia replicas. The real diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires were sitting in a safety deposit box in the Cayman Islands. Derek wouldn't know the difference between a real diamond and a piece of glass if his life depended on it. The rental properties that generated over $60,000 a month in income? They looked pristine in the paperwork, complete with current leases and maintenance records. What Derek didn't know was that every single one had been mortgaged to the hilt, refinanced through a web of LLCs, with the actual equity transferred out, and the properties now carrying debts that exceeded their value by hundreds of thousands of dollars. The tenants were real, the rent checks were real, but the equity was gone, replaced with balloon payment loans that would come due in 6 months. Even the business assets from Derek's real estate development company had been carefully hollowed out. The valuable contracts had been transferred to a new LLC that I controlled through a series of shell companies. His company still existed, still had its fancy office and support staff, but the actual profitable projects were gone, replaced with development deals that looked promising but were actually money pits guaranteed to lose everything invested in them. The beauty of it all was that everything looked completely legitimate. Every document was filed correctly. Every transfer had been done through proper legal channels. Every substitution was so expertly executed that it would take a team of forensic accountants months to figure out what had happened. And by then, it would be far too late. All I had to do was wait for Derek to make his move, which he did exactly 18 months ago when he filed for divorce and tried to hide our assets in offshore accounts where he thought I couldn't reach them. The fool was hiding money that was already gone, protecting assets that were already worthless, congratulating himself on a shell game where he was playing with empty shells. And now, watching him load those boxes into his truck, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years: peace. Let him have his victory lap. Let him celebrate with Melissa and Victoria and Trevor, and everyone else who thought I was just another foolish wife who'd been outsmarted by her clever husband. Richard cleared his throat. "Elena, what's really in those boxes?" I turned to face him, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I smiled. Really smiled. Exactly what he deserves, Richard. Exactly what he deserves. Derek's truck pulled away from the curb, packed with boxes full of forgeries, fakes, worthless paper, and debt. He thought he'd stolen my life. What he'd actually stolen was his own destruction, carefully packaged and gift-wrapped by the woman he'd underestimated for the last time. But Derek's real surprise wasn't in those boxes. His real surprise was waiting for him at home, and he had no idea it was coming. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations. Now back to the story. Derek didn't wait long to celebrate. According to Catherine, who I'd kept on retainer for exactly this purpose, he threw a party at our house, the one he'd gotten in the settlement, just 3 days after the divorce was finalized. Melissa was there, of course, already playing Lady of the Manor. Victoria Brendan attended, toasting Derek's brilliant legal victory. Even his parents came, though his mother had always secretly hated me, so her presence was no surprise. "They're opening champagne," Catherine reported over the phone, her voice tinged with amusement. "The $800 bottle of Dom Perignon from your wine cellar." How appropriate, I said, settling into the porch swing at my mother's Vermont cabin. The place wasn't as run down as the appraisal suggested. Another little detail I'd arranged. Let them celebrate. What Derek and his entourage didn't know was that the real show was scheduled to begin in approximately 48 hours. I'd planned the timing down to the minute. Revenge, I'd learned, was all about the perfect sequence of revelations. You couldn't blow everything up at once. You had to let them feel safe first. Let them believe they'd won. Only then did you pull back the curtain. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning. Derek called my phone 17 times in the span of 3 hours. I didn't answer. Instead, I listened to each voicemail with a cup of coffee in my hand and genuine curiosity about which problem he'd discovered first. Elena, what the fuck is this? Call me back now. The first message. Angry but still controlled. You bitch. You fucking bitch. What did you do? The fifth message. Rage taking over. Please, Elena, we need to talk about this. I know you're upset, but this isn't funny. The 12th message. Desperation creeping in. By the 17th message, his voice had cracked completely. I don't understand. How did you? Elena, please. Please call me back. I deleted all the messages without responding and checked my email instead. There it was, a forwarded message from James, my cousin the estate lawyer. The balloon payments on the rental properties had come due. Derek now owed $2.7 million to various banks, due in full within 30 days, or they'd foreclose on all 8 properties simultaneously. But that wasn't the beautiful part. The beautiful part was that Derek had already spent the past 3 days calling everyone he knew, bragging about how he'd taken his stupid ex-wife for everything she had. He'd posted on social media about his fresh start and his new beginning. He'd told his business partners that he was about to be flush with cash from liquidating assets. He'd promised Melissa they'd buy a beach house in Malibu. Everyone knew he'd just won big in the divorce. Which meant everyone was about to know that he'd somehow lost it all within a week. The humiliation factor was exquisite. The second domino fell that afternoon when Derek tried to access the investment portfolio to cover the property debt. According to Natasha, who'd maintained contact with Derek's financial advisor, the look on Derek's face when he discovered that his $4.7 million portfolio was actually worth about $47,000 was something that should have been photographed for posterity. He'd screamed at his advisor, demanding to know how this was possible. The advisor, God bless him, had simply pulled up the records showing that Derek himself had authorized the transfers over the past 2 years. Derek's signature was on every document because Derek had actually signed them. He just hadn't bothered to read what he was signing. I'd carefully slipped the authorization forms into the middle of other paperwork he'd routinely signed, trusts and transfers he'd assumed were about hiding money from me. The irony was delicious. Derek had unknowingly signed away his own assets while thinking he was protecting them from me. By Wednesday evening, Derek showed up at the Vermont cabin. Catherine had warned me he was coming. She'd followed him the entire 3-hour drive from the city. I watched from the window as he got out of his car, looking like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. His normally perfectly styled hair was disheveled. His expensive suit was wrinkled. The confidence that had radiated from him during our divorce proceedings had been replaced with something between panic and rage. I met him on the porch, not bothering to invite him inside. What did you do? His voice was hoarse, probably from screaming. What the fuck did you do to me, Elena? I accepted your divorce settlement, I said calmly. You got everything you wanted, remember? The house, the properties, the investments, the business assets. It was your dream deal. Those assets are worthless. The properties are underwater. The portfolio is nothing but shell stocks. You knew. You had to know. I knew that those were the assets you wanted, I replied, examining my fingernails with studied disinterest. I simply gave you what you asked for. Everything was disclosed in the settlement documents. You had your lawyer review everything. It's not my fault if you didn't bother to do your due diligence. His face turned an alarming shade of purple. You switched everything. You replaced it all. That painting in the living room. I had it appraised this morning. It's a fucking fake worth maybe 10 grand. Strange, I mused. I seem to remember you telling me years ago that you didn't care about art, that you only bought that painting because it impressed your business partners. Did you ever actually look at it, Derek? Did you ever appreciate it? Or was it always just about the price tag? The jewelry. He was shouting now, losing control. Your grandmother's jewelry is fake. All of it. Where are the real pieces? The jewelry you swore you'd keep safe as an heirloom for our children? The children we never had because you were too busy fucking your assistant and snorting cocaine with your broker friends. I let a hint of steel enter my voice. That jewelry is exactly where it should be. Safe. Derek lunged forward, but stopped when he saw Catherine emerge from her car, hand resting casually on her hip, where I knew she kept her licensed firearm. She didn't point it, didn't even draw it, just stood there as a reminder that Derek was no longer in control of this situation. You can't do this, Derek said, his voice breaking. This is fraud. I'll sue you. I'll have you arrested. You'll do nothing, I interrupted. Because everything I did was completely legal. Every transfer was properly documented and filed. Every asset swap went through the appropriate channels. You want to sue me? Go ahead. Hire another lawyer. Oh wait, you can't afford one anymore, can you? Victoria charges $800 an hour, and from what I hear, you haven't paid her bill for the divorce yet. That's another $127,000 you owe, by the way. I watched the realization dawn on his face. He was trapped. He'd been so focused on taking everything from me that he'd never stopped to verify what he was actually taking. His greed had blinded him, exactly as I'd known it would. Why? He whispered. After everything, why would you do this to me? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. You really don't know. You destroyed our marriage. You cheated on me for years. You stole from our joint accounts. You forged my signature. You planned to leave me with nothing. And you want to know why I'd do this to you? I would have given you a fair settlement if you'd just asked, he said, and I could hear him trying to convince himself that was true. No, Derek. You would have given me whatever you thought you could get away with giving me, which was as close to nothing as possible. I saw the emails between you and Victoria. I know the plan was to bury me in legal fees until I had to accept whatever scraps you offered. I know you told Melissa I'd be lucky to get $100,000 and my clothes. So don't you dare stand there and pretend you would have been fair. His shoulders slumped. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered coming home to find him in our bed with Melissa, the bed where we'd made love hundreds of times, where I'd comforted him through his father's illness, where we'd talked about our future and our dreams. All of it had been a lie. The properties are going into foreclosure in 3 weeks, he said quietly. I'll lose everything. I'll be bankrupt. You should probably contact a bankruptcy attorney then, I suggested. I hear they're much more affordable than divorce attorneys. I'm going to lose the house. Our house. Your house, I corrected. According to the divorce decree, it's entirely your house now. Your problem. Your debt. Your bankruptcy. He looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before, genuine fear. Please, Elena. There has to be something we can work out. A payment plan, No. What about Melissa? She's pregnant. You do this to my child. The words hung in the air between us. Pregnant. So that was the next move. The sympathy play. The think of the innocent baby card. But Derek had miscalculated again, because I'd known about the pregnancy for 2 months. Catherine was very thorough, and I'd factored it into my plans. Congratulations, I said evenly. I'm sure you and Melissa will figure it out. People raise children with far less than what you're about to have. You might need to get a real job though. Maybe something in customer service? I hear you're good at lying to people's faces. That should translate well. Derek's face contorted with rage and desperation. I'll tell everyone what you did. I'll ruin your reputation. You'll tell everyone that you got outsmarted by the wife you spent a decade underestimating? I smiled. Please do. I'm sure that will help your real estate business tremendously. I can see the headlines now. Successful developer admits he was too stupid to read his own divorce settlement. He stood there, trembling with impotent fury, and I realized this was the moment I'd been waiting for. This was the moment when Derek truly understood that he'd lost. Not just the money or the assets or the prestige. He'd lost the narrative. He'd spent our entire marriage positioning himself as the smart one, the successful one, the one in control. And I'd just revealed that for 10 years, I'd been smarter, more successful at the long game, and infinitely more in control than he'd ever suspected. Get off my property, Derek, I said quietly. And don't come back. He left without another word, climbing into his car with the defeated posture of a man who'd just had his entire world collapse. I watched his taillights disappear down the mountain road, and Catherine joined me on the porch. That went well, she observed. That was just the appetizer, I replied. The main course is tomorrow. Because Derek's financial ruin, as satisfying as it was, wasn't the endgame. It was just the setup for what came next. Tomorrow, Derek was going to discover that losing his money was the least of his problems. Tomorrow, Derek was going to learn that some things, once broken, can't be fixed with any amount of money. And I was going to make absolutely certain he never forgot the lesson. If you're still watching right now, you're exactly the kind of viewer I love. Subscribe so I can keep giving you stories that touch your heart. Hit that bell so you never miss what happens next. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that makes everything seem more vivid, more real. I'd barely slept, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. Today was the day Derek's entire facade would crumble. And unlike the financial devastation he was already experiencing, this would be far more personal. Far more permanent. My phone rang at 6:47 a.m. It was James. "It's done," he said simply. "The DA's office received the package at 6:30. They've already assigned a prosecutor." "Thank you," I replied, my hands surprisingly steady as I poured my morning coffee. "Keep me posted." The package James referred to was 3 years of evidence compiled by Catherine and meticulously organized by myself. Bank records showing embezzlement from Derek's business partners, proof of tax fraud spanning 7 years, documentation of wire fraud in real estate transactions, evidence of money laundering through shell companies, and photographs and video evidence of his cocaine purchases and use. Enough to qualify as felony possession with intent to distribute. But the crown jewel of the package was evidence that Derek had been defrauding his investors. Over the past 4 years, he'd been running what amounted to a small-scale Ponzi scheme, using money from new investors to pay returns to old investors while siphoning off profits for his personal use. 23 families had invested their savings with Derek's development company, trusting him to build their retirement nest eggs. Instead, he'd stolen from them systematically, leaving them with worthless shares in projects that would never be completed. I knew about all of it because I'd been the company's bookkeeper for the first 6 years of our marriage, until Derek had decided I didn't need to worry about business anymore, and hired an outside firm. What he'd actually meant was that I was asking too many questions about discrepancies I'd noticed. The outside firm was run by his college roommate, who was more than happy to cook the books for a generous fee. But I'd kept copies of everything. Every email, every spreadsheet, every suspicious transaction. I'd documented it all in real time, initially thinking I'd confront Derek about it, force him to make things right. Then came the affairs, the lies, and finally the realization that confronting Derek would accomplish nothing. He'd just deny it, gaslight me, and probably find a way to blame me for discovering his crimes. So I'd waited, and compiled, and planned, because I'd learned something crucial about the justice system. Prosecutors love cases that are handed to them completely packaged with irrefutable evidence. They love cases where they don't have to dig through mountains of paperwork themselves, where every document is labeled, every transaction traced, every crime clearly laid out with supporting evidence. I'd given them exactly that kind of case. At 9:23 a.m., according to Catherine, who was monitoring police scanners, 2 FBI agents and 3 local detectives arrived at Derek's house with a warrant. The charges: wire fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. They'd come for his computers, his files, his phone records, everything he'd need to run his business or defend himself. Derek called me at 9:47 a.m. I answered this time. "You did this," he said, his voice eerily calm. It was the calm of someone in shock, not processing what was happening to them. "The FBI is in my house. They're taking everything. You did this." "I gave the authorities evidence of crimes you committed," I corrected. "What they do with that evidence is entirely up to them. I'm just a concerned citizen reporting suspected illegal activity." "You vindictive bitch," he hissed, the calm shattering. "You're going to prison for this. Filing a false report. Harassment. I'll make sure you." "The evidence is real, Derek. Every document, every transaction record, every bank statement. The FBI doesn't show up at your house with warrants based on false reports. They show up when they have probable cause, which means their own investigators reviewed what I provided and found it credible." Silence on the line. I could hear someone in the background, probably Melissa, asking what was happening, her voice high and panicked. "The investors," Derek said slowly, reality beginning to penetrate. "You told them." "Actually, I hadn't. Not yet. But that was next on my list." "Goodbye, Derek," I said and hung up. At 11 a.m., I sent a certified letter to each of Derek's 23 investors. The letter was simple and devastating. "Dear Mr./Mrs. Name, I am writing to inform you that you may be a victim of securities fraud. My ex-husband, Derek Patterson, has been under investigation by the FBI for fraudulent investment schemes. I strongly encourage you to contact the district attorney's office and consider retaining legal counsel. Enclosed, please find copies of documents that may be relevant to your investments with Patterson Development Group. Each envelope contained carefully selected documents showing how Derek had misappropriated their specific investments. Nothing classified or sealed by the authorities, just publicly available corporate filings and bank records that told a damning story when viewed together. By 2 p.m., Derek's lawyer, not Victoria this time, but a criminal defense attorney named Robert Clemens who specialized in white-collar crime, had called demanding I cease all contact with his client's business associates. Your client defrauded those people, I told Clemens calmly. They have a right to know. You're interfering with an active investigation. I'm informing victims of potential crimes. That's not illegal, Mr. Clemens. In fact, the FBI encourages victims to come forward. I'm simply making sure they know they should. This is a vendetta. It's harassment. I'll get a restraining order. On what grounds? That I truthfully informed people they might have been defrauded? Good luck with that. I paused, letting him process. How is Derek paying your retainer, by the way? I ask because from what I understand, his assets are currently underwater by about $3 million, and his bank accounts are frozen pending the FBI investigation. Are you working pro bono? That's very generous. The silence told me that Clemens hadn't fully understood his client's financial situation yet. He would soon. By 5 p.m., Derek was in custody. Not arrested yet, just helping with inquiries at the FBI field office. But according to Catherine's contact in the bureau, they were planning to formally charge him by Monday. The U.S. attorney had already expressed interest in the case because the investor fraud crossed state lines. 2 of Derek's victims lived in Connecticut, 1 in New Jersey. Federal charges. Not state charges that could be bargained down or handled by local courts. Federal charges meant mandatory minimums, meant prosecutors with unlimited resources, meant Derek was facing the possibility of serious prison time if convicted. Melissa called me at 7:30 p.m. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. What do you want? She sobbed into the phone. Why are you doing this to us? To our baby. I'm not doing anything to you, Melissa, I said, and I meant it. Melissa was a symptom, not the disease. I'm simply ensuring that Derek faces consequences for his actions. He's going to prison. Our child will grow up without a father. Derek was going to prison eventually regardless of what I did, I replied, surprised at how little anger I felt toward this woman. She was young, stupid, and thought she'd landed a wealthy older man. Instead, she'd hitched herself to a sinking ship. His crimes would have caught up to him. I just accelerated the timeline. You could make this go away, she pleaded. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them the evidence was wrong. The evidence isn't wrong. And I couldn't make it go away even if I wanted to. The FBI doesn't drop investigations because a witness recants. They have their own forensic accountants now, their own evidence. What I provided was just the roadmap. They're finding plenty more on their own. Please, she whispered. I love him. For the first time in the entire conversation, I felt something that wasn't satisfaction or vindication. I felt pity. Because I'd loved him too once. I'd loved him enough to ignore warning signs. I'd loved him enough to believe his lies. I'd loved him enough to build a life with him that turned out to be constructed entirely on quicksand. Then you should probably prepare yourself for visiting him in federal prison, I said quietly. Because that's where he's going, Melissa. And there's nothing I or you or anyone else can do to stop it now. She hung up crying. I sat on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Derek would never have stopped to appreciate. He'd always been too busy chasing the next deal, the next conquest, the next achievement that would prove he was successful and important and better than everyone else. My phone buzzed with a text from Natasha. It's all over social media. Derek's arrest. The investor fraud. Everything. His professional reputation is destroyed. Another text from James. The DA wants to meet with you next week. They're considering you as a witness for the prosecution. One more from Catherine. Derek's parents just showed up at the FBI building. His mother looks like she's aged 10 years. His father wouldn't comment to reporters. Reporters. Of course there were reporters. A successful real estate developer arrested for defrauding investors? That was news. Derek had spent years cultivating his image in the local business community, giving interviews about his success, his strategy, his vision for urban development. He'd loved the attention, the recognition, being treated like he was some kind of real estate genius. Now that image was being dissected on the evening news, and every ambitious journalist in the state was digging through public records looking for more dirt. They'd find it too. Derek had left a trail of broken promises, angry partners, and suspicious deals going back 15 years. But I wasn't done yet. The financial ruin and the criminal charges were devastating, but they weren't the final blow. The final blow was more personal, more intimate, and would cut deeper than any federal prosecutor ever could. Because tomorrow, Derek was going to lose something he valued even more than his money or his freedom. Tomorrow, Derek was going to lose his dignity, and I was going to be the one to take it from him. The news broke at 6 a.m. on Friday. Not on some small local news blog or regional paper, but on the front page of the state's largest newspaper, with a secondary feature in the business section and an investigative piece that ran both in print and online. The headline read, "Real Estate Developer Derek Patterson, A Decade of Deception." The article was devastating in its detail and surgical in its precision. It chronicled Derek's rise in the real estate development world, his carefully cultivated image as a visionary developer, and then systematically dismantled that image by revealing the truth. The affairs, the embezzlement, the investor fraud, the cocaine habit, and the elaborate scheme to hide assets during his divorce. But what made the article truly devastating was the interview at its center. An interview with me. I'd spent 3 hours with investigative reporter Amanda Chun 2 weeks ago, giving her everything. Not just the financial crimes, but the personal betrayals. The affairs. All 7 of them that Catherine had documented. The fake business trips that were really weekends with mistresses in Miami and Las Vegas. The way Derek had lied to my face about working late, while he was actually at his downtown apartment with Melissa. Amanda was a Pulitzer Prize finalist, known for her takedowns of corrupt politicians and corporate fraudsters. When I'd approached her with Derek's story, she'd been skeptical at first. But I'd come prepared with documentation, evidence, and a narrative that was both personally compelling and journalistically sound. "Why are you doing this?" she'd asked during our interview, her recorder sitting between us on the coffee table. "Why go public? The criminal charges are already filed. You've already gotten your financial revenge. Why expose yourself like this?" "Because Derek's greatest talent was making people believe he was something he wasn't," I'd answered. "He sold himself as a devoted husband while cheating, as an honest businessman while defrauding investors, as a successful developer while stealing from his partners. I want the world to see who he really is. Not the image he projected, but the man behind the mask." The article was accompanied by photos. Derek at charity galas with his arm around me, smiling for the camera while, according to the timestamps, he'd been texting with Melissa about meeting up later. Derek accepting a Developer of the Year award while owing his investors millions. Derek's company website promising integrity and excellence in every project, juxtaposed with court documents detailing his fraud. But the most damaging photo was one I'd provided myself. A screenshot of an email Derek had sent to Victoria Brendan during our divorce proceedings, outlining his plan to take the bitch for everything and leave her with nothing but debt and humiliation. "I want her to regret ever meeting me," Derek had written. "I want her to know she was too stupid to see what was happening right under her nose. By the time I'm done, she'll be lucky to afford a studio apartment." The article quoted that email in full, letting Derek's own words condemn him. Amanda had contextualized it perfectly. Patterson's plan was to financially devastate his ex-wife while she remained ignorant of his decade-long pattern of fraud. Instead, according to court documents and interviews, Elena Patterson spent 3 years carefully documenting her husband's crimes and methodically transferring their genuine assets beyond his reach, leaving him with worthless properties and mounting debts. By 8 a.m., the article had been shared over 50,000 times on social media. By noon, it had gone viral nationally, picked up by business news outlets, and even some national papers. The story had everything: betrayal, deception, a wife's revenge, financial crimes, and a spectacular public humiliation. Derek's professional network began to collapse immediately. By 10 a.m., 3 of his business partners had filed lawsuits seeking to dissolve their partnerships and recover invested funds. By 11 a.m., the state licensing board had announced an investigation into whether Derek's real estate broker license should be suspended. By 1 p.m., Derek's Country Club had quietly removed his name from the member directory on their website. The court of public opinion worked faster than any legal proceeding could. Social media was brutal. Former colleagues who'd praised Derek last week were now posting about how they'd always suspected something was off. Business associates were sharing their own stories of suspicious dealings. Even former friends were distancing themselves, posting about being shocked and disappointed by the revelations. But the personal cost was even higher. According to Catherine, who was still monitoring the situation, Derek's parents had released a statement through their attorney. "We are devastated by the allegations against our son and are cooperating fully with law enforcement. Our hearts go out to those who were harmed by his actions." Translation: Derek's own parents were throwing him under the bus to protect their own reputation and assets. They'd built their fortune in commercial real estate over 40 years, and they weren't about to let their son's crimes taint their legacy. Derek's brother Trevor, who'd helped him load those boxes on the day the divorce was finalized, posted on social media. "I had no knowledge of my brother's illegal activities and do not condone his actions in any way. I am shocked and saddened to learn the truth." Trevor was lying. He'd known about at least some of Derek's affairs and had helped cover for him. But he was smart enough to distance himself now that the ship was sinking. Even Melissa made a statement, posted through her Instagram account. "I am a victim of Derek Patterson's deception as well. I believed his lies about his marriage being over and his business being legitimate. I am focusing on my health and my unborn child, and will not be making any further statements." Derek had been abandoned by everyone. His family, his friends, his business partners, even the woman carrying his child. In less than a week, he'd gone from celebrating his divorce victory to being a social pariah facing federal charges and financial ruin. My phone rang constantly, reporters wanting interviews, talk shows wanting appearances, even a documentary filmmaker interested in telling my story. I declined them all. Amanda's article had said everything I needed to say. The rest would play out in court, and in Derek's slow rebuild of a life that would never again reach the heights he'd achieved through deception. But there was one call I did take. It came at 4 p.m. from an unknown number. "Hello." I answered, though I knew who it would be. "Are you satisfied now?" Derek's voice was barely recognizable. "Hoarse, broken, empty. My entire life is destroyed. My career is over. My family won't speak to me. Melissa's leaving me. I'm going to prison. Are you happy, Elena? Is this what you wanted?" "What I wanted," I said slowly, "was for you to be faithful. To be honest. To value our marriage as much as I did. To build a life together instead of tearing me down while you built yourself up. What I wanted was for you to see me as a partner instead of an obstacle to overcome." "I loved you," he said, and I almost believed he meant it. "No, Derek. You loved what I represented. The supportive wife who made you look good at business dinners. The reliable partner who handled the details while you chased glory. The woman who believed in you even when you'd stopped believing in yourself. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of me, and when I stopped being useful to that idea, you threw me away. I made mistakes. You made choices," I interrupted. "Conscious, deliberate choices to lie, to cheat, to steal. Don't diminish what you did by calling them mistakes. You knew exactly what you were doing, Derek. You just never expected to face consequences. Silence on the line, broken only by what might have been crying. I should have treated you better," he finally whispered. "I see that now. I should have." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have. And if you had, you'd still have your career, your reputation, your freedom. You'd have a wife who loved you and supported you. You'd have built something real instead of a house of cards that was always destined to collapse." "What happens now?" he asked, sounding lost. "Now you face the consequences of your actions. You work with your lawyer to minimize your prison sentence. You make restitution to your investors if you're able. You figure out how to be a father from prison, if that's even possible. You live with the knowledge that every choice you made led you exactly here. And you," his voice hardened slightly, "you just get to walk away. Live happily ever after in your little cabin with all the money you stole from me." "I didn't steal anything from you, Derek. I protected what was mine from someone I knew would try to take it. There's a difference." I paused, letting that sink in. "And as for living happily ever after, I don't know if I'll be happy. But I'll be free. Free from your lies, your manipulation, your constant devaluation. Free to build a life based on truth instead of deception. That's worth more than any amount of money." "I'll fight this," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "I'll appeal. I'll prove you tampered with evidence. You'll do whatever you need to do," I said gently. "But we both know how this ends, Derek. The evidence is real. The crimes are real. The consequences are real. Fighting it will just make it worse." I hung up before he could respond. Outside, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in those same beautiful colors Derek had never appreciated. But I did. I stood on the porch and watched until the last light faded, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Derek's legal team would probably try to implicate me in something. The media attention would continue for a while. There would be depositions and court appearances, and 100 small indignities, as Derek's case wound through the justice system. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of carrying Derek's secrets, of planning my revenge, of maintaining my facade, it was finally lifting. The war wasn't over yet, but the major battles had been won. Derek had been defeated not by force, but by his own arrogance and greed. He'd underestimated the quiet woman he'd married, assumed she'd stay quiet and compliant forever. That assumption had cost him everything. And tomorrow, I would begin the final phase of my plan. The part that would ensure Derek never forgot what he'd lost or why he'd lost it. 3 months later, I stood in the downtown office of Patterson Development Group, which was no longer Patterson Development Group. The company had been seized as part of the FBI's investigation, its assets liquidated to provide partial restitution to Derek's investors. The office space itself was being sold, and I'd arranged to view it before it went to auction. "This is where it all started," Catherine observed, walking through the empty conference room where Derek had probably held hundreds of meetings, made thousands of promises, and built his empire of lies. "No," I corrected her. "This is where it ended. I'd purchased the building through one of my LLCs. Not out of sentimentality, but because it was a good investment property in a prime downtown location. The irony that I now own the space where Derek had built his fraudulent empire wasn't lost on me. But it wasn't why I'd bought it either. I had plans for the building. Real plans, not the fantasy developments Derek had sold to his investors. I was going to convert it into affordable housing and office space for nonprofit organizations. A tangible good rising from the ashes of Derek's destructive greed. Derek's trial was scheduled to begin in 2 weeks. His legal team had tried everything, claiming I'd planted evidence, arguing entrapment, suggesting prosecutorial overreach. None of it had worked. The evidence was too solid, too well documented, too clearly showing a pattern of deliberate criminal behavior. The U.S. attorney had offered Derek a plea deal. 15 years in federal prison in exchange for pleading guilty and cooperating with ongoing investigations into his business partners and associates. Derek was still refusing, convinced he could win at trial. His lawyers knew better, but he was paying them to defend him, not to force him to accept reality. Melissa had left him 2 months ago, moving back to her parents' house in Ohio with her growing belly and her shattered dreams. She'd given an interview to a tabloid magazine, painting herself as Derek's victim, which in a way she was. Derek had lied to her just as thoroughly as he'd lied to everyone else. She'd posted ultrasound photos on Instagram with captions about starting over and learning from mistakes. I hoped, for her child's sake, that she actually would learn. Derek's investors were receiving about 40 cents on the dollar through the asset liquidation and a victim's fund. Not enough to make them whole, but more than they'd expected. 3 of them had sent me letters thanking me for exposing Derek's fraud. 2 had tried to sue me, claiming I'd been complicit in Derek's crimes, but those suits had been quickly dismissed. I'd been cleared of any wrongdoing by both the FBI and the SEC. If anything, I was being treated as a victim who'd fought back, not a perpetrator. But the real surprise had come last week when the State Bar Association had reached out. They were investigating Derek's attorney, Victoria Brendan, based on evidence that had emerged during the criminal investigation. Turned out Victoria had known about some of Derek's financial irregularities during our divorce proceedings and had helped him hide assets from the court. Real criminal behavior, not the perfectly legal asset protection I'd executed. Victoria was now facing disbarment and possible criminal charges herself. The divorce settlement she'd been so proud of securing for Derek was being used as evidence of her misconduct. Justice, I discovered, had a beautifully ironic sense of timing. My phone rang. It was James. "The money hit your account," he said. "All $8.3 million. Properly documented, properly taxed, completely legal and above board. The real assets I'd protected. The genuine art, the actual investment portfolios, the legitimate business interests, had been held in trust for 3 years. Now that the divorce was finalized and Derek's criminal case was proceeding, those assets could be properly distributed to their rightful owner. Me. Add in the equity from the rental properties before they'd been mortgaged. the proceeds from selling off some investments, and the value of other assets, and I was walking away from my marriage to Derek Patterson significantly wealthier than when I'd entered it. Not because I'd stolen from him, but because I'd worked for 10 years helping build his business, without proper compensation, I might add, and because I'd been smart enough to protect what was rightfully mine. "Thank you, James," I said. "For everything." "Thank Natasha and Diane too," he replied. "And Catherine. This was a team effort." He was right. I couldn't have done this alone. It had taken a team of smart, dedicated people who believed in justice, and who were willing to help me fight back against someone who'd tried to destroy me. After hanging up, I walked to the window of Derek's former office and looked out at the city skyline. Derek used to stand here, Catherine had told me, looking out at the city like he owned it, like he was a king surveying his kingdom. Now the kingdom was gone, and the king was awaiting trial in a federal detention center, unable to make bail. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "I hope you're happy with what you've done. You've destroyed everything. My life, my future, our investors' money, my family. Was it worth it? Did ruining me make you feel better about yourself?" Derek had somehow gotten access to a phone in detention. The message was so perfectly him, playing the victim, refusing to take responsibility, trying to make me feel guilty for his own crimes. I typed out a response. "Derek, everything that happened to you was a consequence of your own choices. I didn't cheat on you. I didn't defraud investors. I didn't embezzle money or commit tax fraud. I simply refused to be your victim. There's a difference." His reply came quickly. "You could have handled this differently. Worked with me. We could have split everything fairly and moved on with our lives." I almost laughed. Even now, facing 15 years in prison, Derek genuinely believed that I should have just accepted his infidelity and theft, that I should have played nice and let him walk away with half of everything he'd tried to steal. "We had 10 years to handle things fairly, Derek. You chose differently. Goodbye." I blocked the number and deleted the conversation. I didn't need closure from Derek. I didn't need his understanding or his apology or his acceptance. His opinion of me had stopped matching the moment I'd found him in bed with Melissa. What I needed now was to move forward. The next week passed in a blur of meetings with architects and contractors about the building renovation, conferences with financial advisors about investing my assets wisely, and planning sessions with nonprofit directors about the office space I was going to provide. I also started therapy. Not because I was broken, but because carrying the weight of Derek's betrayal and 3 years of secret planning had taken a toll I was only now beginning to recognize. Dr. Morrison, my therapist, was helping me process not just the anger and hurt, but also the satisfaction and guilt that came with having orchestrated Derek's downfall so completely. "Do you regret it?" she asked during our third session. "Exposing him the way you did?" I thought about it carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that he made choices that led to this outcome. But no, I don't regret holding him accountable for what he did. Even knowing he'll spend years in prison? "He's not going to prison because of me," I said firmly. "He's going to prison because he committed crimes. Serious, deliberate crimes that hurt a lot of people. I just made sure those crimes came to light." "And if you could go back," Dr. Morrison pressed, "knowing everything you know now, would you still marry him?" That question stopped me cold. Would I? Knowing the heartbreak and betrayal that awaited me? Knowing I'd spend 3 years of my life planning an elaborate revenge? Knowing how it would all end? "I think I would," I finally answered. Because all of it, the good years and the bad, the love and the betrayal, the planning and the execution, all of it made me who I am today. Stronger, smarter, more aware of my own worth. I don't regret becoming this person, even though the path to get here was painful. Dr. Morrison smiled. "That's growth, Elena. Real growth." The trial began on a cold Tuesday in February. I attended, sitting in the public gallery behind the prosecutors. I wanted Derek to see me there, wanted him to know that I wasn't hiding, wasn't ashamed, wasn't intimidated. Derek looked smaller somehow, diminished in his ill-fitting suit and handcuffs. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the haunted look of someone who'd finally realized the full extent of what they'd lost. His eyes found mine across the courtroom. For a moment, we just looked at each other, all the history between us hanging in the air. I didn't smile or frown. I just looked at him evenly, calmly, letting him see that I was okay. More than okay. I was free. He looked away first. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented their case methodically, calling witness after witness, showing document after document. Derek's investors testified about the money they'd lost, the dreams that had been shattered. Business partners described Derek's deceptions. Even Melissa was called, though she pleaded the fifth on several questions. Catherine testified about the evidence she'd gathered. Natasha explained the financial maneuvers Derek had used to hide his crimes. The FBI's forensic accountant walked the jury through a paper trail that clearly showed years of deliberate fraud. Derek's defense was that he'd made mistakes, that he'd been in over his head, that he'd never intended to hurt anyone. It was a weak defense, and the jury saw through it. They deliberated for less than 8 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Wire fraud, securities fraud, tax evasion, money laundering. The sentencing hearing was set for 6 weeks later. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. I'd already received what I came for. The truth being told, justice being served, and Derek being held accountable. According to news reports, Derek was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. With good behavior, he'd likely serve 15. He'd be 61 years old when he got out, his prime years gone, his reputation permanently destroyed, his fortune evaporated. The judge, in delivering the sentence, said something that Catherine texted me. Mr. Patterson's crimes were not crimes of desperation or necessity. They were crimes of greed and ego. He believed he was above the law, above consequences, above basic human decency. This sentence reflects not just the financial harm he caused, but the betrayal of trust that was at the heart of his criminal enterprise. I stood on the porch of my Vermont cabin, reading that text, and felt something shift inside me. Not satisfaction exactly. Not victory. Something quieter, deeper. Peace. It was over. Really, truly over. 6 months after Derek's sentencing, I was having lunch with Natasha, Diane, and Catherine at a small cafe in Burlington. To Elena, Natasha raised her glass, who proved that revenge is a dish best served with proper legal documentation. We all laughed, the kind of comfortable laughter that comes from shared experience and hard-won wisdom. What are you going to do now? Diane asked. You've got money, freedom, and a hell of a story. The world is yours. I thought about it. The building renovation was nearly complete. The nonprofit offices were already being occupied. I'd established a scholarship fund for women escaping abusive marriages, wanting to help others who might find themselves in the situation I'd been in. I think, I said slowly, I'm going to live. Really live. Not planning revenge or documenting crimes, or protecting myself from someone I'm supposed to be able to trust. Just live. That sounds boring, Catherine teased, but her eyes were warm. After the last 3 years? Boring sounds perfect. We finished our lunch, talking about everything and nothing. Natasha's upcoming vacation, Diane's new business venture, Catherine's retirement plans. Normal things. Friend things. The kind of simple pleasures that Derek's betrayal had stolen from me for so long. As I drove back to the cabin that evening, I passed a billboard advertising Derek's former company, now being run by a court-appointed administrator trying to salvage what little legitimate business remained. Derek's face had been removed from the advertisement, his name scrubbed from the company materials. It was as if he'd never existed, his entire legacy erased by his own greed and my methodical dismantling of his facade. Some people might have felt sorry for him. Might have thought that 18 years in prison was too harsh, that I'd been too ruthless, that everyone deserved forgiveness. But those people hadn't lived my life. Hadn't discovered their husband's betrayal in the most cliché way possible. Hadn't spent 3 years meticulously documenting crimes and planning justice, because the system wouldn't have protected them otherwise. Hadn't been told by their spouse that they were too stupid to see what was happening right under their nose. Derek had tried to destroy me. Instead, he'd underestimated me. And that underestimation had cost him everything. I pulled into the driveway of my cabin, my home now, free and clear, truly mine, and sat for a moment in the gathering dusk. The mountains rose around me, solid and permanent, having witnessed countless human dramas play out in their shadows. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from James. Derek's final appeal was denied. It's over. I typed back. Good. Thank you for everything. Then I turned off my phone, walked into my house, and poured myself a glass of wine. I sat by the fireplace as the flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and I thought about the future. Not Derek's future, which would be spent behind bars learning too late that actions have consequences. Not even about my past, which had been painful but necessary to become who I was today. I thought about tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days stretching out before me. Days without fear, without betrayal, without having to constantly watch my back or plan 3 moves ahead. Derek had stolen a lot from me over the years, my trust, my innocence, my belief in happily ever after. But in the end, I'd stolen something much more valuable from him. His future, his freedom, and his carefully constructed lie of a life. The boxes Derek had loaded into his truck that day, so confident in his victory, had contained exactly what he deserved. Not the treasures he'd imagined, but the seeds of his own destruction, carefully packaged and waiting for exactly the right moment to bloom. And bloom they had, more spectacularly than even I had dared to hope. I raised my glass to the empty room. To new beginnings, I said aloud. And to never again underestimating the quiet ones. Outside, the mountains stood silent witness, as they had for millions of years, and would for millions more. Human dramas came and went, some ending in tragedy, some in triumph, and some, like mine, in a perfectly executed justice that felt like both. I'd entered my marriage as Elena the trusting wife. I was ending it as Elena the architect of consequences. And tomorrow I'd wake up as simply Elena, a woman who'd fought back, won, and was finally, blessedly free to write her own story. The fire crackled. The wine was smooth. The silence was peaceful. And for the first time in 4 years, I slept through the night without a single nightmare about what Derek might do next. Because Derek couldn't do anything next. Derek's story was over. Mine was just beginning.